if folks are watching this show, I have to believe the vast majority of us are would not hesitate at all to support our kids if they were to come out to us. You know,
Yeah.
if we had a queer kid, I know that a lot of people listening might be made a little bit anxious about how they would perform, maybe, and how to maybe stick the landing in that situation. But I have full faith that it's what we would all aspire to be is, accepting and loving in these different ways. But I also know that we put a lot of accidental barriers in the way of allowing our kids to come out, or even making it seem as if coming out is some big process or some big secret that they're keeping until they're ready to share it. What are some of those barriers, or maybe some of the ways of working around them? What comes to mind for y'all?
I know I'm sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. I was just gonna say, like, so one of the biggest barriers that I would think of that to get around is how you approach them when they talk about other stuff, right? So
Mm,
if you're shutting them down or not supporting them or being critical or teasing them or being sarcastic with other stuff, like whether it's homework or an interest, or something they want to do, then when they come to you with something that's even more sensitive, like their sexuality, even if you've said before, like, "Hey, whatever your sexuality is, I'll accept you," it's not going to matter if your behavior is unapproachable, right? So it's the other moments I think that break down the most barriers. Like, are you a person who, in general, is approachable by your kids, or do you put up barriers like sarcastic remarks or shutting them down or not listening to them?
No, that's fair to say. I mean, being a good parent turns into being a good parent in a lot of ways. And I
Right.
definitely see that. But I also know that we live in a society where it is really normalized to look at, young boys and joke about their girlfriends or these different
Right.
things. And it's
Hmm.
always gendered in those particular ways. And so that's kind of one that comes to mind for me is oftentimes when my kiddo talks about dating, I will be, pretty mindful to say, like, whoever you start dating, or whoever you
Yes.
want to date,
Right.
or, the person that you want to date. And, you don't have to play games or like be perfect with your pronouns here. But I think
Right.
going ahead and introducing the notion that there's nothing strange about a young boy being interested in dating a young boy, and vice versa, and these different kinds of things. Uh,
I
is
really like
there
that. Yeah. So I had always told my kids, boyfriend or girlfriend, but I like when you say person. Like that's even easier to say. So I would say, yeah, when you bring home like a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And when one of us in the household, because my kids got so used to hearing that kind of talk, that when one of us in the house would say something like, well, if she has a boyfriend or if he gets a girlfriend, the other one would chime in and say, or the opposite sex, right? Or boyfriend,
sure.
right? And
Hmm.
Yeah.
so it's kind of neat to get that kind of culture going early on. But I like the way you put it, where you just said person, because it's a little like easier on the tongue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have gotten in so many. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an etymologist, but I don't know anything about bugs. But the way that we have gotten habituated in our culture to certain assumptions actually is making things so much harder. Like when I hear people complain about the singular they, I'm like, it's because you just haven't been using it. It's a great tool, guys.
And it's not hard to pick up if you practice it.
It's really not.
Yeah, it's like it's because I have a queer child that's non-binary, and like using the singular they is a transition because I've been saying she for 20 years, and now I got
Sure.
to start using this new pronoun. But I use it even in private. I use
Mhm.
it when I'm even writing texts. I use it when I'm referring to them because one, it becomes habit, and two, it's that reminder to myself that I honor my child for who they are, not what I want them to be. And I think a lot of what parents worry about, because the way that we grew up, there was a lot of homophobia and transphobia, and it has, and for this generation's kids, don't most kids don't care. They're very accepting of trans and non-binary, wherever you are in the rainbow, they are more easily accepting, where our
Right.
fear comes from what we saw growing up, where if you were gay, you were like bullied and picked on and heard about hate crimes, which still happen, and I know that they're serious, but for this generation it's not as big as a deal to them if they've grown up in this they've grown up this attitude that, yeah, you're gay, whatever. Like my son's best friend is a trans man. Best friends, he does not care, does not care.
Doesn't
They're
think
best
anything of
friends,
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
does not, loves him, his best friend. They hang out, play video games, go to Starbucks all the time, and that's fine. And
Yeah.
that's been wonderful for me to see, because I'm just like, that's something I hope that I kind of taught them, to just accept people for who they are. But there's always, like, when, like, having a queer child, that there's always that thought in the back of your mind, like, what if they can't get a job? What if they're bullied? What if they're attacked, for being non-binary and stuff like that? Because that fear is there, and it's okay to acknowledge the fear and tell your child that you are scared for them, but you want them to live their life and be happy and fulfilled as a person that they're meant to be. But you still have that, because you love and want to protect them and want them to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's my shit that I have to deal with. That's my
Well,
fear. I'm
and
not going
that
to put
fear is
that on.
society, it's not you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I'm not
I'm
going to put it
scared for
on
you
you.
because of what other people might do or say
Right.
or how they might react to you, but you, who you are, like, you're perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
like I love you for who you are, but and acknowledge it, because if you
Yeah.
don't acknowledge, like, it's the white elephant in the room, like, and if you don't say anything, they're gonna pick up on it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna know that there's something, because they know you, and they've observed you for however long they've been alive, and you're the person closest to them. They're going to notice that you are feeling nervous, and you have to say that, like, this is what I'm worried about. Not you. I'm worried about society and what might come. But I will be
Yeah.
here to help you navigate that.
I love that. I remember at one
Yeah.
time my son, he's 11 now, but I think he was around 9 or 10 at the time, came up to me and he asked, he's like, "Mom, why do some people hate gay people?" And it was a completely foreign idea to him, and like blew his mind that there's even people out there who are like that. But just having that conversation with him, that there are those dangers out there and there are still people out there that will hurt others. It was a great conversation that allowed us to be very, very sex positive and very, very sexuality
Hmm.
positive, but also address a very real issue, um, that is still something that we have to deal with.
Yeah, we've talked about it a few times tonight, but I really appreciate the two of you highlighting the idea that the tensions and anxieties and the nervousness and the squeamishness and all of that our kids experience, it's not necessarily innate. It's not necessarily coming from their biology. When it comes to homophobia and transphobia and these different things, they're picking that up from us. They're picking up on our nervousness, our tension, our
Hmm.
uncomfortableness. As a therapist, it's especially since I specialize in issues of gender and sexuality, I often will have parents reach out to me about wanting to see their kid who's maybe going through puberty and is starting to ask questions about their gender identity and is starting to wonder, like, oh, maybe I am trans, or maybe I'm this or that.
Mhm.
And so
Hmm.
often when I sit down to speak with these kids, they're totally chill about it. They're like, yeah, I might be a boy, but I might not be. I don't really know. And I'm like, okay, do you want to talk about it? And they're like, well, we can talk about it if you want, but that's all I really have to say about it. And
Right.
so often their parents are kind of wringing their hands. And I get it. The idea of having a trans child in 2021 is terribly upsetting, not because of trans children, but because of transphobes and
Yeah.
everything that goes
Hmm.
into that child's future experience and everything else. But something else that I often hear that I think is valid and at least worth addressing is oftentimes kids, particularly when they're younger, try on different identities and they can
Yes.
maybe be silly. Maybe they don't give these things like the gravity or the weight that we feel that they should. And oftentimes a young kid will sort of just try on a new gender or try on a new identity without necessarily like committing to it. And
Hmm.
I think oftentimes that makes parents feel like they are being perhaps disrespectful to members of the trans community, for instance, or to folks who have really bled for those adjectives and really bled and sacrificed for those labels. As parents, I'm curious what either of y'all would say about the possibility of a 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 year old just sort of like adopting a new gender identity and then maybe putting it back like a week later, and whether or not that really does come across as disrespectful, or maybe just how much gravity or weight we should be giving these things. What comes to mind for y'all?
I'm
I,
I'll
I,
let you go first, Helen. Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say, I can understand, like, for people in the LGBTQ plus community that, like, I can understand wanting to be respectful to them, especially since the ones that have come before, so this generation doesn't have to jump through so many damn hoops to get accepted, and we're still working on that. But I think also too that um I think that most adults know that sometimes, sometimes you want to play around with gender and get an idea of who you are and stuff like that. So I think that no matter where someone is on their journey, that if your kid wants to dress up as the opposite sex for a week, that's fine. If they want to try on different gender roles for a little bit, that's fine, because that's part of the experience. Because when they were younger, they were trying to figure those things out and probably went through similar things where they tried on a gender for a couple weeks and they were like, this fits. Or later on, they were like, you know what, I don't like this, and moved on. Or they were like, oh, I tried on this gender, I feel much more comfortable, and they accepted it. But because of outside pressure, they had to put it away for a little while. So, I think that, I would hope that the LGBT, like trans community, the non-binary community, and that sort of thing, would recognize that sometimes kids need to play around with those gender roles and play around with their presentation and who they are for a little while. And then as they, especially in adolescence, you're trying on all different things anyway, trying to figure out who you are. And then later down the line, if they decide that they are going to stay their gender or transition into another one or live somewhere betwixt, that's fine. And that's okay too, and just support your child where they are, and also tell them, like, okay, you can play it, and also talk about like some of the consequences that might happen and stuff like that, and say, I will support you no matter what, but just be aware that this might be perceived this way. So,
Mm-hmm.
and have honest conversations about that, so and they're not doing it out of mockery. And that's a major thing too, that they're doing it because they are trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah, I would say that the mockery thing is a really, really big piece, for me, is what are
Yeah.
their
Which
motivations
is
and their intentions,
tricky
right?
though,
And
right?
Yes, it
Like when
yeah,
is.
you're
I'd
when you're
say
talking
err
to a 14-year-old about, like it's something being serious or important. I don't know that any 14-year-old treats anything like it's important, other than whatever the hell it is that you just did to embarrass them.
and I wouldn't approach it in the sense of like, whether or not you're taking it seriously. It would be more, I wouldn't ask them that. I'd be like, "Hey, are you serious right now? Are you being serious? Are you joking?" I would
Mm,
I would avoid
Yeah.
that like the plague.
Yeah,
I
I
think
would
that's
too.
And
really good
and I
advice. Yeah.
wouldn't yeah, yeah, and I wouldn't question their motives. But if you're seeing that they're doing it in a mocking way, like say a male who starts dressing like a female but does it in a way that's disrespectful or mocking, that can be addressed, certainly. Like
Sure.
what their behavior is doing and how it's being disrespectful to the trans community and to women and to their own gender, like or to themselves, by
Hmm.
making that mockery. But I'm right there with Helen. I think honestly, kids need to be able to explore themselves, and if we decide that there's these arbitrary rules of when or how you can express your sexuality, or how long you have to wait until it's solidified and it's definitely for sure, I know of adults who still, like, I am very gender fluid. I identify as she, her only because it's the most convenient, so I'm not constantly changing my mind, right?
Sure.
But
Hmm.
I move in and out of whether or not I feel more feminine or more masculine, more male or more female constantly. So for a teenager, I have to imagine that it's even worse. And to have that sort of flexibility and to give them that freedom and that opportunity to express themselves, I think it should I almost want to say it should be encouraged. Like, hey, yeah, go ahead, try out something new. And if it doesn't fit you and you go back to your old fashion, let's just keep it in the closet in a bag until you know for sure you don't want it anymore. And if you want to go back to it, great. If you're
Mhm.
done with it, we'll donate it or whatever. But um, I think like whether or not it should be offensive to the trans community, I think it should be celebrated. I think if we're trying to make something normal and make it not
Hmm.
taboo, then we need to make it normal and not taboo, right?
Yeah, and I guess I'll say that I certainly don't pretend to speak for the trans community or anything
Mhm,
grandiose like that, but I don't ever hear that concern coming from
mhm.
queer folks. I don't ever hear
Hmm.
I haven't either.
queer folks
I
getting
haven't heard either.
upset about what your 14-year-old is wearing. It's always the straight parents that are kind of anxious, and I appreciate it. You know, if you're listening to this and you have had some of those thoughts or some of these conversations with your kid, I like that you are working to be respectful of a community that you're not a part of. I like that you are teaching your kid to be respectful of a community that they're potentially a part of, or just taking that membership very seriously. But also, this is all play, and especially when we're talking to kids, play is really the only language that we can speak to them in. And so being willing to just try on different identities, try on different hats, try on different clothes in general, I think that that needs to be, like you said, Laura, something that we encourage rather than something that we put all of these like barriers and restrictions on.
Well, so then I wanna take it like a step further, and maybe ask it as a question, maybe as a statement. I'm not sure, but so you talk about say a teenager who's trying on gender roles and like say they decide, okay, so I was born a male, but maybe I'm a female. No, 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 I tried it out. I'm actually a male. But where I see a lot of pushback with parents is when kids are much much younger, like toddler or preschool age,
Hmm.
where parents have a hard time if their girl wants to dress like a boy or play with boy toys, or if a boy wants to dress up like a girl. I especially see it with dress up with boys. Like parents feel that tension
I've
of,
seen that
I
too.
don't think I should let my little boy dress up. And I
Yeah.
did. I let him. Like he used to love dressing up. And it has had that I can tell it's had no impact on his sexuality. I'm pretty sure he's a cis het male. Like I don't and it wouldn't matter to me if he wasn't, but I don't see any difference because I let him dress up. And
Yeah, I
so
mean, certainly allowing him to wear certain clothes is not going to change his identity so much as
right,
his like relationship with that identity and his comfort with that identity and
right.
everything else. But I would even go so far, and this is not really my field scholastically, but I would presume that by allowing a 4, 5, 6-year-old boy access to a fairy princess dress and the
Yeah,
opportunity to dress up
Yeah.
in those ways, you may more likely be providing the opportunity for him to find some confidence in affirming his gender by
heck
being able
yeah.
to say, like, nah, I kind of tried that or I played with that. Obviously, we're talking about. When we're talking about a 4-year-old, we're talking about a 4-year-old and how much we should like take that and extrapolate out. Maybe we should hold our horses a little bit, but if
Absolutely.
nothing else, we're fostering an environment where play and curiosity are being encouraged. And I think that that's absolutely vital.
Like like you can like wear a girly girl dress as a man, and also like working construction. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both.
Absolutely.
So I don't see like why we're putting arbitrary rules on a 3, 4-year old. Like if they want, like if you're like if you have a little girl, and I can speak as a parent that my daughter was like this when they were little. They wanted to, we got them baby stroller and a doll, and all they wanted to do was race across the house pushing that stroller, just run it, like had no interest in the baby, and was the kid that wanted to be in the dirt and all that
Yep.
type of stuff. And then I have seen boys that want to play in like play house and want to wear dresses and take on like a female role, quote unquote, those gender roles, because they're exploring, they're playing, they're trying. That's part of figuring out your identity and modeling what they see from their parents do, and stuff like that. And if we start putting rules on them that says like girls only do this and boys only do this and stuff like that, one, I think that it teaches that these things are very binary still, and where we now know that they're not. And also
Right.
too, you're putting restrictions on your child. You're telling them like you have to do this thing, and that's not healthy for them. And if you want your child to grow up to respect men, women, wherever somebody identifies as a gender, don't put arbitrary rules on it. And then as they grow up, they'll discover what fits for them and what makes them okay. And then they'll grow up to be a more respectful, loving human being. And that's what we want as parents. We want them to be kind people when they grow up.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like there's the most important thing is how you're treating people. And I want to step in not just as a parent, but also as a child to really like just slam home what Helen was saying. So like me as a girl, as a child, I was a huge tomboy. So I got Barbies and My Little Ponies and stuff as gifts. And I would go and I would play with my brother's Legos and their Star Wars toys and their GI Joes. And I would always be so jealous. And I remember asking for a BMX when I was like 4 or 5, my very first bike. I wanted a BMX because it's a kick-ass boy's bike and you go on the dirt with it. And I ended up getting a little pink Huffy with like a little pouch on the front. And I was so upset about it that my mom told me that that was the girl version of a BMX and that I needed the girl version because my body was different, right? Like she just
Ooh.
did not want to get me a boy's bike. And as much as
Yeah.
I love her and she encouraged me and she allowed me to be all these different things, she still wanted a little girl.
Sure.
And so it was hard, that sort of friction between allowing a girl to really express her boy side. And I will tell you, growing up, all of the girl stuff that I was given and all of the ways that I was encouraged to be more feminine didn't do a damn thing for how I turned
Did it
out.
stick?
I'm still a tomboy and I still
Yeah.
get in the dirt and play
Right.
outside.
Like
Yeah.
I when I was growing up, I had a little bit of combination of both because I had like 5 older brothers and I was the only girl. But so I would still get my Barbies and My Little Ponies, but I would also like play with Legos, and my brothers would take me out like snowmobiling and dirt biking and stuff like that. So I got both.
Kind
I
of
grew up very cis and girly, and I like to wear makeup and do all my girly things and stuff like that. And I do not go outside unless I have to. I've turned into a vampire. Don't go outside. But but it just shows that no matter how you try to fit people into boxes, they're going to grow up who they're going to be. And
Yeah.
so why are you trying to put them in a box? Because
Yeah.
because it's just gonna be more of a struggle for them to break out of it.
Well, and it's not to say also, like, for all those parents out there, like, I do want to take a step back there and reiterate, it's not bad to buy your girly stuff and your boy
No,
boy
it's
stuff.
not.
Sure.
It's really not at all. And it's not even bad to expose them to different things that you think are gender affirming, right? Like buying them dresses or whatever. But at the same time, it's that flexibility. It's that understanding that if they do ask for something more masculine or feminine and they're the opposite sex, that it's okay, like, to let them explore that.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot tonight about how to, I guess, support our own kids and how to, make space for them to be themselves. But I also wanted to at least touch before we wrap up tonight on how we encourage our kids to be accepting of other folks, to be like good and strong allies. Particularly if we have kids that are getting messaging that's not just from us, right? Like it's one thing if they are being raised in a tolerant household, but if they are, perhaps visiting grandma who has some very like strong religious beliefs, or if they are hearing things from another parent or something along those lines, how do you encourage your kid to be a good ally without just like throwing other people in their lives under the bus and being like, no, grandma's an idiot. Like if she's a homophobe, then, fuck her. Don't listen to her. That's not a message that a 10-year-old is ready to hear. So how do we like teach our kids to be good allies in a world that is constantly teaching them otherwise?
I think all you can really do is model.
Mm,
and I think that's the best way to do it. Like your kid, your kids are watching you all the time, and they're picking up cues on how to treat other people and stuff like that. And yeah, grandma's a homophobe or a racist or whatever it is. That's just that you can have a conversation with a 10-year-old and just say, we don't say those words in our house. We don't, we always treat people with respect. And that's it. You don't have to go into a long tangent about like grandma's a homophobe, and these are the reasons why and why it's wrong. You just say, we don't use these words in our house. We're gonna be respectful for people for who they are. And then as they get older, and like kids hear this stuff anyway. Like the internet exists. So
sure.
they're hearing this stuff anyway, and you're gonna have to have conversations with them about like bigoted people, and they know bigoted people exist in their family.
Mm,
Like if a grandma or grandpa drops a slur, they're gonna hear it. Or even if you don't think they're listening to you and you're bitching about it with your partner about it, they're gonna pick up on that. And so you gotta have that conversation. Just be like, we don't talk that way in this house. We're always respectful to people, no matter who they are, and just leave it at that. And just say, I hope when you're not with us that you do the same thing, because your words have
sure.
power and we don't want to hurt other people.
Yeah, perhaps my proudest moment as a parent came when my teenager recently came home from middle school talking about how rough and tough the older kids were and everything, and how toxic the environment was and how brave he is and all this. And I was like, okay, but my favorite thing was when he mentioned, he was like, well, they use a lot of bad words, and I kind of looked at him and he was like, yeah, swear words and slurs. And the fact that he like understood the distinction there and understood that,
Nice.
I might say, fucking damn and, all of these kinds of words, but that there are other words that I would never utter on this
Mhm.
show or any other. And that there's a meaningful distinction, that there's not just like bad words, but there are words that are swears that are only appropriate in, kind of places that are inappropriate. Like, right? Like we only swear because we want to emphasize something
Right.
in a particular way, and that's completely different from the N word or the F word or these things that we would never repeat.
Mm.
I think that's a important lesson for kids to recognize, because at 10 they know that they're not supposed to be using cuss words or whatever the term might be in your household,
Mm.
and differentiating that from a slur I think is a really important thing.
Yeah, in terms of words, we've always taught our kids that it's there are no such thing as bad words, but there's the
Sure.
bad usage of words. And
Yeah.
so there are
Mhm.
words out there that only have bad meanings, though, like you mentioned the N word, and I don't even like saying it on air, even in context where it would be appropriate to use it. Like,
Sure.
so those kinds of words, it's not a bad word, it's just that the meaning that has been put behind it and the way that people interpret it, there's no way in which that word could be used appropriately. Whereas other words, like the word or like fuck or shit or anything like that, like, you can find an appropriate time to use those words, where expletives do have a psychological impact on us that can help the situation, or they can, be used to elucidate things and make things clearer, you know? So there is a time and a place for them, especially an audience, there's an audience for them.
Yeah, a
Um,
particular
Yeah,
audience. I
exactly.
think
Like,
that's
know
an
yeah,
your
important
audience. Know
consideration.
your
Yeah.
yeah,
know
yeah,
your
and
audience.
yeah, and in terms of, what we were talking about earlier with, like, how to deal with kids getting information from other people, um, the one thing that I've always done is tried to respect the other person still, but be honest about it. So we
Yeah,
Mhm.
we
that's
we have
tricky
a
line to walk.
yeah, yeah. We have a blended family, so we have, my ex and then my son with him, and then my husband's ex, and he has 2 kids with them. And so we've had to have a lot of different conversations of, "Well, your mom thinks this and we don't," or "Your dad thinks this and we don't." But we do it in a way that's, "Here's what we believe. Here's why we believe it. We don't agree with them, but that doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that we want you to give preference to us over them. You need to
Sure.
reflect on the data that we're giving you and the information that they're giving you, and you
Mhm.
need to decide for yourself what it is that you believe." Um, so and that would be the same thing with grandparents. Like, "Well, grandma believes something different than us, and I'm not gonna disparage grandma, but here's what we believe." right?
Mm-hmm.
So yes, she might tell you that being gay is bad, but we don't believe that being gay is bad. And what do you think? Like, how would you determine whether or not something like that is good or bad?
Yeah, that's a bold stance. I have struggled with where to draw the line because I have told my kiddo that he is more than welcome to go to church with other family members to believe what he wants to believe and these
Yeah.
different things. But I have also drawn a little bit of a line in the sand when it comes to human rights and
Yeah.
suggested that, like, you know, I don't need you to just do what I say. I don't need you to believe everything that I believe. You're your own person. I respect that, but in this household, like, we believe that love is love. Like, we believe that
Mhm.
we're going to treat everybody with dignity. And I don't know, it can be a little bit tricky to say, like, well, everybody has their own values when those values really cross some lines that cut into bigotry or devaluing other human beings. It's tricky all around.
That is true, and I think that you can attack somebody's belief without attacking the person,
Sure.
or at least not
Yeah.
disparaging them with the child. So, any belief that I would say is harmful to people, like we do have family with bigoted beliefs that I do believe are harmful, and I'm very upfront with my kids about it. Like, one of my family members, I've told them, I said, the reason I don't have a relationship with this family member is X, Y, and Z. Like, you'll respect them, like when you're around them, and you'll treat them the way that you want to be treated, but their beliefs are dangerous, and here's why. And I don't think
Mm,
that's necessarily a bad thing to do. It's when it turns to needless shit talking, or when it turns to trying to get a kid to pick sides,
right.
with the smaller
Yeah, and
issues,
you don't
like
want to do that.
yeah, especially
You
when you
don't.
talk about, like, religion, where it's like, "Oh, well, you don't wanna believe what grandma believes, she's just wrong." Like, how about teach them how to
I
be critical thinkers and let them like
Yeah.
what
I
you
did
said,
tell
Come to
Christy.
those beliefs.
I have jokes with my kids. I was like, "Listen," I'm like, "If you become religious when you get older, it's fine. I'll love you anyway, but I'm gonna feel like I did something wrong.
Mm,
Like I screwed up along the way if you do." But I would love them regardless. So, that's a joke I tell them all the time when we have conversations about religion. But when it comes to homophobia,
Mhm.
transphobia, racism, sexism, stuff like that. That is a line. That is a
Yep.
stone wall. I don't want them to cross. And they're pretty. And it's kind of funny with this generation, especially because they're so like my kids are a little bit older. They're 17 and 20. They're
Mhm.
way more socially aware than I was at their age, and they call things out before I even know that it exists. They'll go like
sure.
they'll talk to me about
Yeah.
an anime or something, and they'll be like, "Yeah, you can watch it, but it's like really sexist, mom," and they'll just say
Yeah,
it, you
or
know.
the
So
reverse happens too, like, my son just came up to me and he's like, "Did you know that they have these gay characters in World of Warcraft?" And he's telling me all about them, and he's all excited. So it happens both ways. They're very sensitive to this whole social movement and how we're trying to get everything to be more inclusive. They're very sensitive to that, and they see it both ways.
yeah, and I think that's something I'm hopeful for the future because they're not carrying around all this baggage that we had to work through when we were growing up and trying to figure out like what's okay, what's not okay, and all these gender roles and pushing those aside and like, well, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. I just want and like trying to find your happiness, trying to find your joy in
Mhm.
life. That they're kind of saying like, what, all the shit that your generation and generations before you are trying to put on us, we don't want that shit. And I think that's very, very encouraging for those of us, and those of us as parents that are want to raise our children to be kind, good people without all the bullshit
Mhm.
Hmm.
that we were carrying around. So I think that's why I love seeing that now, to
Sure.
have, as a parent and just as a human being, to see these kids grow up to be better people than we were.
I like it.
Well,
Yeah.
that's certainly
Not
the
me
goal.
personally. I'm
Well,
wonderful.
right, naturally, naturally. Well, we're getting a little bit long tonight, so before we wrap up, I really wanted to make sure to take this opportunity to remind people about Sex Positive Families, a incredible resource with a number of different books and recordings and information about a lot of the topics that we're talking about, and how to raise a sex positive family, how to talk about secular sexuality with your kids. Are there any other resources or websites that you might send folks towards, or really any other final words that you'd like to leave with the audience tonight?
I think the biggest thing that I would like to point out that, like, as I said in the beginning, yes, these conversations are awkward and they can be uncomfortable and they can not be your favorite thing to talk about, especially if you've come from religion or purity culture and you don't know how to approach these things. But acknowledge that it's uncomfortable, but you are the best resource and the best person for your kids to talk about sex with.
Mm.
You know, as they grow up, you are the best person. And also, like, if you got some hang-ups, acknowledge your feelings, work through them, and it'll be fine. It will be fine, I promise. And so if you don't want to worry about what your kids are doing and you don't want to be stressed out about it, talk to your kids, educate them, and just tell them to be respectful, kind, and have honest conversations, and you can put them out into the world. And they'll grow up to be good
Indeed.
people, I promise.
And I would add to that, like, it is okay to not get everything exactly right or perfect the first time.
Exactly.
Like, they're gonna turn out okay even if you make a few mistakes along the way.
Yeah, you've got the rest of your life to be having these conversations and to keep
Yeah.
building on these things. You're not going to eat the whole apple in one bite.